Assalamualaikum. I'm Dr. Nast again here with a new topic and very important topic of cardiology, diastolic dysfunction. As we have discussed in our last lectures about heart failure, the systolic dysfunction, now we are going to discuss this diastolic dysfunction. First of all, what is diastolic dysfunction and what is HFpEF, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So there is a lot of difference. Diastolic dysfunction is the findings, is one of the cause of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. But if it means if your patient has no sign or symptoms but the only diastolic dysfunction, then you cannot label your patient as a patient of HFpEF, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, until and unless your patient would develop the sign and symptoms of the heart failure. Then you will say that your patient is of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction secondary to diastolic dysfunction. So what is the definition of the HFpEF? One thing is sign and symptoms and signs of heart failures. Second, raised BNP levels, natric ureatide peptide levels, and EF. Important thing is EF more than 50%, and the last thing is anything which would be evidence of preserved ejection fraction either on the echocardiography and on cath or echo. So if you would say that anything with preserved ejection fraction causes heart failure, we would say it's simply the heart failure with the evidence of heart failure like natriuretic peptides, raised LVDP on the cath. Now the important thing, important thing which you are noticing here at the right side of my board is the echo findings and the cath findings of diastolic dysfunction and the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. I want to discuss the pathophysiology first, and then we will move towards these things, because that is the important and the only important thing in the diastolic dysfunction. That's why I just wrote it separately at the right side of the board, and you will just looking at the board and just learn by heart all these numbers, all these hemodynamic values, because these are actually the things which you would which would help you to diagnose the patient of the HFpEF and the diastolic dysfunction. Now the important thing is pathophysiology. As the tradition of my lectures, we always discuss the pathophysiology of diseases. So diastolic dysfunction, I told you that heart has two functions: one to push the blood from LV and LA, LV to system like aorta. So the capacity of heart to contract and push the blood into the system is called as a systolic function, but this is actually pushing of the blood. But there is another system to suck the blood, to pull the blood from LA to LV. Okay, so how heart would do this? Heart, by relaxing the LV, it decreases the LVDP, because when LV dilates, the pressure in the LV decreases because volume increases. So because of the decreased pressure here, the LA pressure would be higher than volume in the early diastole. In the early diastole, come into your LV, in the LV by passive means, with no force. Okay, so we would say that anything which prevents LV to dilate and to suck the blood from LA to the LV into the early diastole is called as diastolic dysfunction. Anything which causes failure of LV to dilate and take the flow from LA into the early diastole. So this is the mitral. Any flow which occurs across the mitral valve from LV to LV is shown as in echocardiography is shown as E, and in the led diastole, when atria contracts, like when P occurs before the systole, then when LA contracts, then this atrial contraction causes the blood flow from LA to LV by active means, because now you are pushing the blood. LA is pushing the blood against the LV. Okay, so you would say that it is A. So in normal, in normal lives with the normal diastolic dysfunction, always E would be greater, because your cardiac output, more than 70% of your cardiac output is because of this E, because of this passive filling of the from LA to LV. Is the passive filling of the LV from LA is by passive means, because of the decrease LVDP, because of this decrease LVDP. Okay, and this A would always be smaller, like 30%, because that is the active means, because this A shows that atria is contracting to shift the blood from LA to LV. So, okay, so that's why now in this this whole things which I have discussed here with you, that the flow across the mitral valve, when we just look it into the echocardiography, transthoracic echocardiography, then we would call it as a transmitral flow, transmitral flow velocities, and we will discuss it later on in the criterion, echocardiographic criterion of the diastolic dysfunction. Just remember that this would occur which actually causes what? Diastolic dysfunction. So anything which actually prevent the LV relaxation in the diastole causes the diastolic dysfunction. Now two things are major which actually decreases the diastolic relaxation in the diastole of the LV. One is a decreased relaxation of LV because of any means, we will discuss later on. Second is stiffness, increased stiffness. Decreased relaxation causes the increase LVDP, and increased stiffness is also cause increased LVDP. So any disease which causes the decreased relaxation of the LV causes the diastolic dysfunction, and any disease which increases the stiffness of the heart causes the diastolic dysfunction. So decrease a relaxation such as okay, so how relaxation occurs in the heart? The relaxation of the heart requires ATP. This ATP break into ADP and IP. This IP would be provided to the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the myocardium, and this myocardium would use this IP, this phosphate, as an energy and relaxes its heart. So the relaxation of the heart needs energy. That's why when the sufficient energy would not be there, then it would cause what? Impaired relaxation. That things occur in ischemia, because in ischemia you would not have enough energy, you would not have enough oxygen to produce the energy. That's why ischemia is number one cause of diastolic dysfunction. All the patients with the diastolic dysfunction should be ruled out for the ischemia. Okay, got it? That's why, so ischemia causes decreased relaxation of the heart, and decreased relaxation of the heart obviously causes the diastolic dysfunction. Impaired relaxation of the heart causes diastolic dysfunction. And second thing, what are the other things which causes this? Most of this, anything which like hypertension. In hypertension, obviously there would be the myocardial hypertrophy of your cells, which obviously causes more force to which again have more pressure, more LVDP into the LV, which causes the decreased relaxation of your heart. Okay, so the ischemia is the most common cause of the decreased relaxation. Now come to the increased stiffness. All infiltrative diseases, all infiltrative and restrictive diseases, restrictive cardiomyopathies, causes infiltration of the abnormal tissues between and among the myocardial cells, causes increased stiffness. When they increase, when the cell of the myocardium would have, obviously that would be if the normal myocardial cells, they have enough space to relax, to get relaxed. But when this space would be filled by infiltrative tissues, then this increased infiltrative tissue deposition between the myocardial cells causes decreased relaxation and increased stiffness of the myocardial cells or the myocardial or the LV cavity, obviously LV cavity. So your LV will not relax because of the increased stiffness. So that increased stiffness causes what? Diastolic dysfunction. I hope that you would have understood that what is actually the pathophysiology behind the diastolic dysfunction. There are only two things: impaired relaxation and increased stiffness. Now, what are the common risk factors for, the most commonly asking question is the common risk factors for the diastolic dysfunction? You should know that. Number one is age. In increased age, there would be capability to develop the increased stiffness because of the aging and the senile procedure. That's why aging causes the diastolic dysfunction. Number one, age. Number two, females. Females heart have tendency to develop the diastolic dysfunction more than the males. Okay. Then third one is hypertension, as I told you. Number four, diabetes. Number five, obesity. And number six, CKD, because CKD causes most of the time deposition of abnormal tissues into the heart. So these are the associated factors or the common risk factors associated with the diastolic dysfunction. If your patient says these things, they are presenting to the short of breath with normal EF, then you would have suspicion of diastolic dysfunction or HFpEF in those patients, and you have to deal them very seriously. You have to probe them for the diastolic dysfunction. Simple as that. Okay. Now, what sign and symptoms would be there in your patients? Obviously, symptoms remain same. Symptoms remain same as HFrEF. Same HFrEF. Your patient would have dyspnea, orthopnea, PND, and all these things. And keep one thing, remember that the initially it was suspected and expected that the HFpEF patients would have more of like good prognosis than the HFrEF patients because of the preserved EF. No, it's not like that, because we will discuss here that in HFpEF patients they have very few medications who would have a mortality benefit, but in HFrEF patients we have a lot of medications who would have a who can prevent the like your remodeling, and who can give the mortality benefit to our patients. So actually the survival of the patient with the HFpEF and the HFrEF is almost equal. They both have a mortality rates are almost nearly equal. So you cannot say your patient that you would have a very good prognosis because you are in the HFpEF, you have a preserved ejection fraction. No, never at all. Now the symptoms, signs would be always again same. Your patient would be in failure, sort of pulmonary edema, right heart failures like generalized anasarca, pedal edemas, and your patient would have S3, S4 as well, because atria has to contract against the stiff ventricle. Then you would have S4 as well. But here the important thing is that apical impulse would not be displaced. In the HFrEF patients, you would have a dilated cardiomyopathy, you have a dilated heart. That's why you would get the dilated heart, and apical impulse would be displaced to the axillary lines. But here the apical impulse would not be displaced, and it would remain between the intraclavicular line, so it would not be displaced. This is the most important thing which you need to remember here. Then again the Kussmaul signs, the loss of JVP or the loss of decrease of JVP on the inspiration would be here because of the obviously increased right heart pressures. But here the important thing is that in diastolic dysfunction you have to distinguish your patient with diastolic dysfunction with constrictive pericarditis. If your patient has the overt system of the right heart failure, then you have to think about the constrictive pericarditis, because these are the both diseases which actually coincides their hemodynamic values on the cath and their all the clinical symptoms would remain same because of the right heart involvement as well in the diastolic dysfunction. And in the constrictive pericarditis, your LV would also be constricted because of the increased pressures in the pericardium. That's why. But the treatment is totally different between with the diastolic dysfunction, with the restrictive cardiomyopathy, and with constrictive pericarditis. In constrictive pericarditis, we will discuss in our lectures of the constrictive pericarditis that you have to treat with like pericardial window and all these things. But here in restrictive cardiomyopathy, you need to transplant. There's no other options with those patients who have overt symptoms of the acute flash edema with recurrent symptoms of the heart failures. Okay. So that is actually very important to distinguish the constrictive pericarditis with these things. Now, what else you would have on the laboratory? Lab. Obviously, you would get the ECG done. You would have the same things like pseudo infarct in V1 to V3 because of amyloidosis. Second thing, anything which shows ischemia, because ischemia also have a diastolic dysfunction, then you get any like ST depressions or all these things. You might would have all these things in your ECGs, but most of the time in diastolic dysfunction because of ischemia would have normal ECGs. Okay, so remember these things in your mind. Okay, LVH, you might would have LVH because obviously, as we discussed here, the hypertension is one of the associated risk factor of the diastolic dysfunction. Then might your patient would have a LVH on the ECGs. Now, chest radiographs. Chest X-ray. On chest X-ray, your patient would have a signs of the pulmonary edema such as Curly B signs, engorged pulmonary vessels, pulmonary crepes, no, not crepes, like non-homogeneous opacities or infiltrates, generalized infiltrates. Okay, or sometimes pleural effusions as well. As you know that in the failed heart, either systolic or the diastolic, you would have a pulmonary infiltrates and engorged vessels, Curly B signs, and obviously the pulmonary effusions, and these effusions would always, most of the time, would be bilateral. Okay, now come to the specific laboratory findings. What else you can go for? Obviously, as we discussed here, that for the diastolic dysfunction, for the HFpEF, to diagnose the patient with the heart failure with normal ejection fraction, if you want to say this your patient to HFpEF, then obviously you have to send BNP levels or anti-pro-BNP levels, which we discussed in our last lectures. The values remain same, 100 and I think 200 for young patients and 400 for elderly patients. Okay, so keep one thing, remember that BNPRs are important here because your patient has a normal ejection fraction. If you want to exclude anything with the pulmonary, and if you want to rule out the symptoms, that are the symptoms the symptoms of patients are cardiogenic or either cardiogenic or pulmonary, then you need to send this BNP levels. Okay, why? Yes, obviously in other causes of non-cardiac causes of non-cardiac causes have raised BNP as well, but most of the time in heart failure patient would have a very raised BNP levels, which actually indicate that your patient is with the heart failure system, because we discussed in our last lecture why these our heart has two system. One is the RAS system to increase the heart failure, and second is the BNP natriuretic peptide system, NPS system, to decrease the heart failure. That's why body secretes this BNP level to decrease the heart failure actually, which is a protective from nature in our body. So we tend to send this BNP levels as well. Now the important thing here, that differential diagnosis. What differentials would come in your mind when you would see the normal diastolic normal ejection fraction or diastolic dysfunction, and your patient is presenting to again and again with the heart failure? Number one, as I told you, that ischemia is the number one cause, and you need to rule out the ischemia in your patients. And obviously if you want to do the angiography and all these things, then yes, you can go for according to the guideline, accordingly to your guidelines. Okay, you cannot take your patients directly to the CAT because of the diastolic. Yes, but you can take to your patient to the your patients with diastolic dysfunction if they are coming again and again with your symptoms. So you have to obviously treat them according to the guidelines of AHA and ESC guidelines. Now second thing is, one is obviously ischemia. Number two, okay, HFpEF with ischemia, as I told you. Okay, so those patients who have a preserved ejection fraction secondary to ischemia, that actually remain 1 point. Number two is HUCUM. In HUCUM means hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in absence of hypertension and ACE. If your patient has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in absence of hypertension, because HUCUM is again a diagnosis of exclusion. Same is here, diastolic dysfunction is a diagnosis of exclusion. If your patient has normally like reduced EF, then you cannot diagnose your patient as a diastolic dysfunction, because your patient has already reduced ejection fraction. So you cannot measure the diastolic dysfunction of your patient, because your diastolic dysfunction might because of the reduced systolic function of your heart. That's why diastolic dysfunction is a diagnosis of exclusion. If your patient has valvular abnormalities, if your patient has another abnormalities, then you cannot say that your patient has a diastolic dysfunction. Okay, so got it. So here is that HUCUM in the absence of, and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is again the diagnosis of exclusion. Your patient should not have a hypertension or ACE. So if your patient has hypertension and ACE, then might this hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is because of the hypertension and ACE. That's why to diagnose the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it is one of the point that your patient should not have a hypertension and aortic stenosis. Now come to the point that in the hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, your patient would have a light cycle dysfunction. So this is one of the differential diagnoses. You have to rule out the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in your HFpEF patient. If your patient is coming to the HFpEF, you have to rule out the ischemia, you have to rule out the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, you have to send the workup for the infiltrative diseases. Infiltrative diseases means, now we have to discuss the infiltrative diseases, and briefly we will discuss about the three things we actually need to rule out. One is ischemia, second is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, third one is infiltrative diseases. Cardiac amyloidosis is common cause of infiltrative diseases in the HFpEF patient, and cardiac amyloidosis are of three types: primary, secondary and senile. Primary is actually a hematological malignancy. They cause the deposition of amyloid tissue because of the monoclonal plasma cells produced by the light chain immunoglobulins in the blood. Actually, this is a hematological malignancy which causes the cardiac amyloidosis or deposition of the amyloid tissue into the heart. And obviously it has a very bad prognosis. You have to treat the cancer actually. So you will send your patient, you will treat your patient with the heart failure with the HFpEF drugs, and then you will send your patient to the oncologist for the further treatment. Secondary is like familial. Familial has a history of deposition of this transthyretin Transthyretin, actually transthyretin is a protein which have a most of the time this transthyretin protein gene is carried by the families. Okay, so this gene is carried by the family, so which produces the transthyretin, and transthyretin increases the deposition of this amyloid tissue. So if the transthyretin causes the increased amyloid tissue, we would call it as familial cardiac amyloidosis, then you would have to treat it accordingly. So in these patients, obviously you would have a deposition of this amyloid tissues in bones, in nerves, and in muscles as well. Okay, and the only treatment of this familial amyloidosis is cardiac transplant, because you cannot do anything with those patients. And third one is a senile. Senile is because of age, as you know that, and this is one of the variant of transthyretin protein deposition, or transthyretin deposition of the amyloid in the body, but it has also not a very good prognosis, and obviously it is, as it is very clear by its name that it is in the elderly people, so you cannot do anything more for them, you just treat them with the medical treatment. Okay, and this usually most commonly occur in the males. Now what other diseases we have here? Endomyocardial fibrosis. This is again by the name, as it is clear that there is a fibrosis of in myocardial cells which causes the infiltrative diseases which call the restrictive pattern of the heart. It has the 50% 2-year mortality. Those patients who have this endomyocardial fibrosis, 50% of the patient would die in 2 years. Very, very, very bad prognosis. Okay, and the common association is AFib and MR. Simple is that. And this is a very rare disease actually. So these patients usually present to you with overt symptoms like NYHA class 3 to 4. They would come again and again to you with the bad failures, and when you examine them, you would get the HFpEF. So this is one of the cause of restrictive pattern or infiltrative cardiomyopathy, restrictive cardiomyopathy, or HFpEF secondary to restrictive cardiomyopathy, secondary to endomyocardial fibrosis. Now the third thing is Loeffler eosinophilic endocarditis. Eosinophilic endocarditis is most of the time asked by in your very fancy papers, such as in your like in your post fellowship exams of in USA or in England, as especially this eosinophilic or the Loeffler's cardiomyopathy or syndrome or endocarditis is asked in echo papers, because this involves the mural thrombus and infiltrative patterns, okay, with diastolic dysfunctions. Whenever they would ask you diastolic dysfunction, most of the time they would ask you, and or they would show you the picture or the views of eosinophilic Loeffler endocarditis or cardiomyopathy. Okay, so this includes this one, obviously eosinophilia, obviously second restrictive cardiomyopathy, as I told you, and number 4 is deposition of this eosinophilia into bones, involvement of bones, nerves, bone marrow, and bone marrow and nerves. So if you have restrictive pattern in your patient with eosinophilia in the bones and bone marrow and nervous system involvement, then you have to always think about the eosinophilic Loeffler syndrome, and most of the time these patients would have a mural thrombus, the very common presentation or the very, very common complication of the Loeffler syndromes. Now idiopathic, as it is as it names showed that idiopathic means it is again the diagnosis of exclusion. All those patients with HFpEF who have no any diagnosis, you can easily count them into the idiopathic cardiomyopathy. Sarcoidosis have also restrictive pattern. Sarcoidosis and amyloidosis are two diseases which have both features, dilated cardiomyopathy as well and the restrictive cardiomyopathy as well. The metabolic storages disease, hemochromatosis, again is the same who have both features, restrictive features as well as actually both forms. They can be presented into the restrictive cardiomyopathy as well as into the your dilated cardiomyopathy. Now come to the glycogen storage disease, Gaucher's disease, Fabry's disease, all these diseases. Now important thing is diagnostic testing and the diagnostic criteria of the diastolic dysfunction. Number one, we have to